Hi, my name is Robert. Please read the comments in the About section of this video. It has valuable information and updates. My YouTube channel has a disclaimer video that I encourage you to watch. And please like, share, and subscribe. I hope you found what you're looking for. Thank you very much for watching. Very common question. What is a blown head gasket and what should you do about it? As you can see, I am in a salvage yard. And unfortunately, that is one option. If the vehicle is in poor condition, in need of a lot of other repairs, safety improvements, and upgrades, you might just want to junk it. But let's take a deeper dive so you can understand what a blown head gasket is and what you should do to resolve it or cut bait. I have decided to make this a three-part video. 1, what is a blown head gasket? 2, what should you do about it if you have a blown head gasket? And 3, how to prevent and what causes a blown head gasket so that you never have to experience that again. So let's get started with the facts of the matter of what is a blown head gasket. For the purpose of helping you understand what is really going on, the truth of the matter is it's really not a blown head gasket. What has happened is the head of the engine has deformed, and possibly the block of the engine has deformed as well. And because it has deformed, it is no longer flat. When the head bottom surface is no longer flat and the block surface is no longer flat, the gasket in between the head and the block is no longer providing a seal. It's not because the gasket is blown per se, as much as it is the head has overheated, and that overheating action has caused the cylinder head to warp and it's no longer flat. So when that happens, the seal is broken, and once that seal is broken, it allows different components in the engine to transfer and mix. When this transfer and mix process happens, the engine no longer functions properly. Okay, so a couple things you need to know real quick. This really applies to combustion engines, like the one in this car behind me. Engines that run off of gas. You go to a gas station, you pump gas. These engines use gas to make a combustion in the cylinder compartment, the cylinder chamber. It is mixed with a spark, and that ignition explosion helps the car produce power, run, and function. Now, a thing that you need to know is the engine is cooled, or the temperature is maintained primarily by coolant fluid. Some people call it antifreeze, some people call it coolant. At any rate, not splitting hairs, trying to prove a point, it's liquid that is added and flows through the radiator and through chambers of the engine. Flows through part of the cylinder head, flows through part of the block, and the purpose of that is to help the engine maintain a temperature close to 200 degrees Fahrenheit so that everything runs properly with the engine. You need coolant to stay in its proper compartments. Another thing that runs through the engine is engine oil. This engine oil is designed to lubricate moving parts in the engine. It lubricates the crank, it lubricates the cylinder walls, it lubricates valves and valve trains and cams. So this lubrication should not ever be mixed with water or coolant. It has its purpose, and the coolant has its purpose. Another thing that goes through the engine, primarily concerned is through the combustion chamber, is air. Air comes through the intake piping into the intake, goes into the combustion chamber, and this chamber is where your combustion happens. It's compressed, it's mixed with fuel and a spark, explosion happens, and then that air is pushed out through the exhaust manifold and out of the exhaust. Now, the purpose of the head gasket is to keep all of those compartments separated. It doesn't let combustion gases mix in with the coolant system. It doesn't let the coolant mix in with the oil. It doesn't let the oil mix in with the coolant. You know, it keeps those three primary compartments separated. Now, what happens when you get a blown head gasket is your engine probably loses coolant. Sometimes it can happen from excessive combustion. 99 times out of 100, your car loses coolant function. Your water pump goes out. It's no longer circulating the coolant, and that failed circulation causes certain spots of the engine to get too hot. Your thermostat jams closed. That stops the coolant from flowing at the proper rate, or it's jammed. It's not letting coolant flow properly. That fluid is not mixing through the engine the way it's supposed to, going through the radiator. You get hot spots. You have excessive combustion that cracks a cylinder wall or a cylinder head valve or something like that. That almost never happens. It's usually a lack of coolant or a lack of coolant circulation. I'm not going to get into that. I got a whole nother video to talk about that. It'll present itself after this video. So the bottom line is, a head gasket 99 times out of 100 gets blown because the engine gets too hot. It really only gets hot because there's not enough coolant circulating through the coolant passages the way it's supposed to, or something has stopped the coolant from circulating, like a stuck thermostat, a busted water pump, or something like that. I once had a car that the water pump blades, called an impeller, actually fell off the inside of the water pump, fell into the engine, and started causing the engine to run hot. Sad situation. I've had situations where the coolant system lost so much coolant because a hose burst pushed all the coolant out under the car, and then there was no longer enough coolant in the engine to keep it at the proper temperature, and it got hot, overheated. I never got a warning on my instrument cluster because there wasn't coolant on the sensor that tells me it was getting hot. So it's kind of a sad situation. So when somebody tells you you have a blown head gasket, what you actually have is an engine that got hotter than it should have. Normally engines run about 200 degrees. Normally that metal begins to deform, cracks, or warps so that those fluids or those air components or that coolant transfers from one chamber to another at around 275 degrees. Coolant begins to boil at 275 degrees. When that happens, it starts to expand beyond its capacities that it's supposed to, and it could crack or damage something. But most of the time, the metal gets so hot that it's no longer flat. That's what they call blown head gasket. The term blown head gasket is a little bit confusing because what has actually happened is the surface of the cylinder head and the surface of the engine block are no longer flat to where that gasket between them keeps them sealed from preventing things from mixing it with each other. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to put some more information a little bit behind this to show you what I mean with a illustration I did some time ago. Now, how you can tell that you have a blown head gasket, a couple of different things. One, your car is losing coolant and your temperature gauge got really high. On the kind of car I own, when you overheat the car, the temperature gauge goes high most of the time, and you open the hood and antifreeze is being forced out of the coolant reservoir. That's normally letting you know that combustion gases are escaping the combustion chamber And while the engine is running, those combustion gases, instead of going out the exhaust, they're getting forced into the coolant chambers of the engine, and they're forcing the coolant out of the engine. They'll blow a radiator hose, they'll blow a heater hose, and they'll blow coolant out of this coolant reservoir. In the engine in my car, this coolant reservoir is where you put your antifreeze or coolant. I do not have a radiator cap on my radiator. All of the coolant is poured in here. This cap has a pressure relief pressure. When the pressure exceeds a certain amount, which was 150 kPa, that will really only happen if combustion gases is getting past the head gasket and getting forced into the coolant chambers. That will cause this coolant to rise to the top of this bottle and force coolant out of this cap. That's the first clue to me that I have a blown head gasket. Another indication that you have a blown head gasket is that you keep blowing coolant hoses. You fill up the system, the car still runs, but the coolant system is getting overpressurized from exhaust gases getting into the coolant chambers. It's pressurizing all the heater hoses and the radiator hoses, and it blows the weakest link. You got a blown head gasket, now it's blowing other things. I've known of a blown head gasket to split a radiator in half. It could bust a radiator. It can make a heater core explode. Things like that. Now, I'm not saying if you get a heater core explode, you got a bad head gasket. I'm saying a bad head gasket can cause those things to happen. So that's one clue. Your engine is forcing coolant out of places that it shouldn't be forcing coolant out of. A second way that you know you got a blown head gasket usually happens after the engine overheats. You get the needle in the red, you get the warning on the dash, engine overheated, shut it down immediately. That indicates you got a blown head gasket, and now you have fluids mixing. You have coolant getting in the oil or oil getting in the coolant. When that happens, those fluids are no longer the proper color. If coolant is getting into the oil looks like chocolate milkshake. If oil is getting into the coolant will look like chocolate milkshake, or will have oil floating around in your coolant reservoir, in your radiator, something like that. So if that stuff happens, you need to shut it down and get it fixed. You know, if you have coolant mixing with your engine oil is no longer properly lubricating things in the engine, and it'll cause your engine to fail. So if your engine oil is contaminated with engine coolant, it's no longer lubricating it, it could wear your engine out very quickly. A couple 100 miles, then your engine will seize, lock up, then you'll need a whole engine. So it might be better to shut the engine down, especially if you have fluids mixing, so that you can get it fixed without more damage. My car has a turbocharger. If I'm mixing coolant in the engine oil and that engine oil is circulating through my turbo, it'll quickly damage my turbo. So to prevent further engine damage or other components damages, you really need to shut that thing down, drain all that bad fluid out, put all the proper fluid in its compartments, don't start it up, and get that fixed, or whatever you're going to decide to do. Another indication of a blown head gasket is that the combustion chamber no longer have a good seal, and that may cause your car to misfire. You might pull the spark plugs, like in this little demonstration I'll show here. Pull the spark plugs out, turn the engine over, and it's ejecting coolant out of the cylinder chamber. Or you could look down in the cylinder chamber and see coolant, because that coolant has gotten past the head gasket and it's now in the combustion chamber. If you have coolant in your combustion chamber, your car is not going to run right. It's going to misfire on every cylinder that has coolant in it. So if you have a 4-cylinder car and coolant gets in number cylinder 2, you're going to have a cylinder 2 misfire. That could cause other things like hydrolocking and stuff like that. If you have a 4-cylinder and the head gasket between 2 and 3 is breached because the head is warped, you could have fluid in both of those cylinders and have a misfire on 2 and 3. Car's probably not going to run at all. But you could pull the spark plugs, crank the car, and see if it ejects coolant up out of the spark plug holes. That way you'll know you got a blown head gasket, or again, a warped cylinder head. On the tail end of this video is some demonstration and some more explanation as to how to know if your car has a blown head gasket, or better yet, a warped cylinder head. And as also at the very end of the video, or in the description area below, there'll be a link as to what you should do if you know that your car has a blown head gasket or warped cylinder head. I hope that helped you understand what is going on when you're told that your car has a blown head gasket. And in the next video, within the next day or two, I'll post and link on the back of this one. It'll tell you what I recommend you do if your car does have that issue and you need to make a decision. Thanks for watching. If you feel that this information was useful, please like it and share it with your social media friends. You can subscribe to my channel so that you will get notifications of future videos that I post. You can follow me on Twitter, and if you need to contact me directly, please visit my website. And if you have any questions, leave them below, and someone or myself will reply to them. Again, thank you very much for watching.